Now, here comes another big concern I have after reading this letter.
Okay.
It says, many Book of Mormon names and places are strikingly similar to many local names and places of the region Joseph Smith lived. Let me show you the maps here.
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
I mean, when I first saw this, I was shocked. I mean, especially with names like Elma on it. I mean, it makes a pretty dang good argument that Prophet Joseph Smith probably used these names and places.
See, the thing is, you're not the first person that's really genuinely confused, because that's you're looking at it and you're like, whoa, right? So the creator of that map, his name is Vernal Holley. I actually read a personal interview with him in the library collection at the University of Utah about some of his experiences, and he had a lot of doubts and questions about the gospel, but also very scholarly and curious man. He also was known often for asking questions that the people around him didn't really know how to answer at the time, and maybe because the gospel knowledge was not nearly as accessible as it is now with the internet. So he turned to other actually anti-Mormon sources, specifically the Spalding manuscript, for answers. So basically, he comes to the conclusion that Joseph Smith did not translate the Book of Mormon by a divine source, but instead he wrote it and copied it from others. And in fact, Holley was later excommunicated for his attempt to discredit Joseph Smith and for a lot of the research he would later publish. So there are 345 unique place names mentioned in the Book of Mormon. What Vernal Holley did was he looked at modern maps that he had available, covering a pretty wide area from West Virginia to Michigan to East Canada, looking for places that he thought Joseph Smith might have borrowed for the Book of Mormon locations. He came up with 28 place names that sounded similar to those in the Book of Mormon, and he created a map of where they were located in the New England area and how he believed that they could correspond to the Book of Mormon geography as well. But there are two big problems with this. First, the map he created doesn't line up with what we know of the Book of Mormon geography at all. Cities that were supposed to be north are actually south. Cities that are supposed to be east are actually west. Nothing on the map actually corresponds to the relative locations and distances that we are told in the Book of Mormon. The second, and I think bigger problem, is that of the 28 cities, or this 28 locations that he does name, 12 of them, which is almost half, by the way, aren't even in existence at Joseph Smith's time. So Kishkumenetez, Pennsylvania, for example, which Holley claimed was the inspiration for the name Kishkumen, wasn't named until 1832, 2 years after the Book of Mormon was published. 9 of them are biblical names like Jordan or Jerusalem, which makes sense given the Nephites' ancestry, that Joseph wouldn't have even needed a map for if he wanted to plagiarize. There are some that did exist during Joseph's time, like Nero, which Holley claimed was the inspiration for Moroni, and Ripple Lake, which he speculated was the basis for the waters of Ripley-Ancum. But many were located far away from Joseph, or so small that they did not appear on any maps at the time. Basically, this map is a logical fallacy. Just because 2% of the names are similar doesn't mean that there's any kind of evidence or ability to prove this theory.
So are you saying that these maps were created just to discredit the Book of Mormon?
Exactly. And you can find out more information. I'll give you a link that you can look deeper and see more detail.
Well, I mean, I'm not as shocked now as I was when I first saw these maps, I guess.
You know, you can't believe everything that you see on the internet, right?
Well, I know that, but it looked so convincing at the beginning. Well, what about this? I mean, we have Hill Cumorah, and where Joseph Smith found these Book of Mormon plates, and we have Angel Moroni or Prophet Moroni in the Book of Mormon. The CES letter says that Joseph got these names from a map of like Africa. Let me see. A map of island Comoro off the coast of Africa and its capital city Moroni. And I guess there was a very popular book talking about adventures of a pirate called Captain Kidd, and he visited this island. So Joseph must have read the book and then just used the name. I mean, Moroni, for example, is not kind of a name you see in the Bible. You just don't. So obviously, to me, I mean, this similarity, it's just, I just can't call it a coincidence.
Yeah. There is a group of 4 islands called the Comoro Archipelago just off the coast of Africa, one of which is the Grand Comore. But its current capital city, Moroni, which translates from ancient Arabic and was originally settled by Arabs around the 10th century, was so small that it almost didn't even exist in Joseph Smith's time, or at least is not on the maps around the time that he translated the Book of Mormon. There was a city on the coast of one of the other islands called Maroni, but no maps have yet been found that contain both place names. And since Moroni was too small, it wasn't on the maps of all 4 islands. As for the suggested links to Captain Kidd, most of the stories and legends told about him as a pirate captain stemmed from the book called A General History of the Robberies and the Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, which did exist in Joseph's day, but it doesn't specifically mention Comore or Moroni. Now, is it possible that Joseph could have somehow heard at least one of those names somewhere, or searched out maps of 2 different islands within the same chain of Africa and linked those 2 places together? I guess it could be possible, but it is incredibly unlikely, and it doesn't account for how complex the Book of Mormon really is, or the way that it's changed millions and millions of people's lives from a spiritual standpoint. For me, when people make these random map connections that are really far-fetched, like they don't have any evidence to prove it, and I don't really think they're an issue.
There are 3 books published before the Book of Mormon, and they are so similar to it. I read some of those on the CES letter, and it was just crazy.
Let's just tackle it here. So we need to first address where the idea came from in the first place.